after the last Thursday's lecture on static semantics and intermediate code generation. If you recall, I had asked you people to read up to slide 44 and come prepared with your doubts or queries. And I had said that I'll spend some 15 minutes looking at your questions before I proceed. So I'll display that slide again. This is what I had written out towards the end of the lecture. So I'm ready out here to see if you have any prepared, any doubts prepared and ready for me. Otherwise, I'll proceed properly with the next part of the course. So is there anyone who wants to raise any question on the material up to slide number 44? Okay, so I'll take the interruptions later on then, and I'll proceed with what I had planned to teach today. I'm not going to go in the slide order. In fact, I'll change completely, and I'll tell you after I've discussed a point which slides I'm talking about. So this is now proper semantics. What I wanted to confirm from the previous lecture was that you have understood certain terms and definitions that are used for semantic analysis. I'll refer you to slide number 43. Okay, so slide 43 talks about 4 ways of doing semantic analysis. But we in this course will use only one, so I'll proceed with that. Okay, this is on slide number 43. The one which I'm going to use, which I'll explain in great detail, is more popularly known as, you will see even in your test answer question paper, they'll refer to this. This stands for syntax for S, directed for D, T stands for translation, and for the last S it is scheme. So this is one of the many ways in which semantic analysis is done. Most of the material that are discussed in academic lectures are on this translation scheme. So number 3 on that slide. So the speciality about this scheme, as I go along and explain in more detail, you will have a rule, let's say A going to alpha, beta, gamma. A is the left hand side non-terminal. Alpha, beta, gamma are grammar symbols on the right. I presume you are familiar with this. Now we are going to write something at the end, which are the semantic rules. This will vary depending on what the grammar is. A translation scheme says like this. This is a common background. If you have any doubts, you should ask me now. Remember that this is all going along with parsing. So what does it mean? Okay, so parsing, I assume all of you understand very well. So there is a parser stack, okay, on which I don't know, there may be something else, so I'll ignore this part. I don't care what these are. After that, we have seen alpha. So here is alpha. I'm ignoring the states. Really speaking, there'll be a state also here, or if you want, I can put it there, but not populated. After that, we have seen beta, whatever the beta grammar symbol is. Then there is a state symbol, and then we have seen gamma, and we are in a certain state. This is the top of stack state. This is how the parser works. I've already discussed in another module, so I will not repeat this. So on the parser stack, after the input has been read and has been assembled back as alpha, beta, gamma on the stack, the parser knows it has to perform a reduce. Right? At this point, it will perform a reduce. Just before reduce, just before it cleans up the stack and reduces it to, as you would know, whatever was there remains. Alpha, beta, gamma is replaced by the left hand side non-terminal LHS non-terminal A, and it finds a new stack. This is my state, which I'm sort of just ignoring. So they are not central to my discussion. They're important for parsers. So it produces this. At this point, just before it reduces, it does the semantic rules. So in a translation scheme, the speciality is that when the action for the rules are to be taken are very concretely provided. So when are the semantic rules to be evaluated? Just before the reduce, the rules are evaluated. So before I move away from the context and essentially go out to detailed examples of semantic analysis, I'll build up a little more on this so that you don't lose track of what we do. So I've already shown you that there is this stack on the top. Now I'm going to draw another picture, and this is the heart of semantic analysis, implementation of semantic analysis. So here is my alpha. Here is some state which I don't care about. Here are my symbols beta. It can be more than one. I don't care. Here is my gamma, and here is my top of stack state. Here's the state. What is done in translation scheme, and that is central to semantic analysis, is along with, we'll call this the parser stack minus some details, it maintains a shadow stack which is called a value stack. Okay. This is not taught in parsing because it is not required for parsing. In the shadow stack or the value stack, you have exactly the same entries as it was there in the parser stack. The only difference is that these don't have the grammar symbols, but they actually have some attributes. Who controls this? The user, we who write the semantic rules. So henceforth we will write semantic rule in terms of attributes. So what is stored over here against alpha? All the attributes of alpha. In the place of state, nothing is there, not important. What is over here? The attributes of beta. And similarly, I'm not writing, just below gamma on the value stack, there will be attributes or values that we will define of gamma. So now you can figure out that when the reduction on the parser stack takes place, and this reduces to, the parser stack will reduce to, as I showed to you earlier, after this alpha, beta, gamma becomes A, and here comes a new state on top of the stack, the usual parsing. Similar thing happens also on the value stack. Except that in the place below A, you don't have A, but you have attributes of A. This is one way of evaluation. A little more interesting thing happens, which I'll tell you in the last lecture, not to complicate your life. Okay. So this is the parser stack after reduction, and the one on the top is the value stack after reduction. Don't worry if you don't get the idea cleanly. I'll give you more examples to understand this in a much more cleaner concept. So this is what happens after the reduction. So what does it mean if you go look below now? When I evaluate or reduce alpha, beta, gamma to the left hand side A, recall the rule. It was alpha, beta, gamma, and some semantic rules over here. So what is the purpose of the rules? The purpose of the rules are to perform whatever is required to find the meaning or generate code or whatever is relevant, and then the generation of the and using the attributes of alpha, beta, gamma, which are already on the stack. If you create the attributes of A as a function of the attributes of the right hand side, then it is very easy to compute this while the reduction takes place. So now we are saying while parser does a reduction on the parsing stack, it does attribute evaluation on the attribute stack, and typically in one way of doing this, the attributes of A, the LHS, depends only on the attributes of the right hand side. There are variations to this which I will not get into today. In all my examples today that we will do, we will only do this kind of attribute evaluation, and if you refer to the notes, we have used a term called S attributed scheme. Synthesized attributes. This is what it is. Now skip theory for the moment, we can get back to theory. So this is what we want to do. We want to take linguistic features Okay? And after taking linguistic features, we'll try to do an intuitive translation, figure out all the issues that are involved in translating, and then write the semantic action so that the desired translation takes place along with. So this is the theme for today. And instead of trying with simpler examples, which I think may not motivate you, I'm going to pick up things at the end of my slides, which talks about translation of control flow constructs. And from there, I'll work backwards to simpler linguistic constructs. But let me first use examples. So I'm not following the slides strictly in order given, but the essence that I am going to do is the same. So what are the control flow constructs? You can actually take C language, but I have taken generic language features. Okay with me if you stick to a language that you know. Typically, we will have something like an if then else statement, an if then statement. Let's start with. I can have an if then else statement. I'm writing in a very English-like language. I need a proper grammar. Okay. I can have a block of statements or a group of statements. We'll give some name for it. Let me call it a list of statements. So I am trying to approach through C, but my notes, as I told you, are more general. Okay, then I can have a while loop. Okay, while loop as in C. I can have a do while loop. I can have a for loop. Okay, and maybe I can have a switch statement. I do these in some order. It's not important that I have to do it in this order. Some of them are very tricky and interesting. Some of them are somewhat simple. So I'll not take each one of them, but I'll take some of these and go down into the issues. Okay, so now saying that I want to translate these structures, we have to decide what? The choice of action for us will be to write some grammar that is suitable. I'll do it slowly, not in one shot. And we'll also have to decide on the semantic actions required for that. Okay. So I'll start by trying to do this, but before that, let's have an intuitive feel of what we are trying to do. So I'll probably pick up if then else as I go along. I'll pick up maybe one while loop or maybe both the while loop, doesn't matter. And the rest I can do later so that you have a good feel of what's happening. This will also force us to look at other statements as you will immediately see. So let me begin now. This will be a somewhat English language kind of description, but I'll suggest, as I've told you earlier, compiler is not a theoretical course, it's a very practical thing. So my suggestion is that write small programs, maybe one feature at a time. If you want to write in C, please write in C. Okay. One feature at a time, maybe one control structure at a time. Write small programs, one feature at a time. Compile them using your compiler. I prefer GCC because it gives me much better control. Find out whether you can do a similar thing. So it is GCC for me if I'm using C. Okay. And look at an intermediate dump of the program after the compiler has gone a little bit distance in process. Is the best way of learning how to translate, because there is a compiler which is helping you tell what it is doing. Okay, and then we'll try and figure out whether we can do it in a similar manner or we can do it differently. So this is for your own learning. For construct that I will not cover in the course, there are so many of them. Just use this approach. Write one piece of code that you want to learn, run through the compiler, don't produce assembly code. I had given last time for GCC, if you remember, I had given you the switch which allows you to do in GCC. I hope some of you will use it to learn better. Okay, so these are suggestions. You may or may not take it. Let me go down and pick up some of these control structures and see what we want to do. So I'll start with an if-then statement. So how do I write an if-then statement in C? You don't write it as an if-then. So we write an if, this is a structure. And then what is inside if? Typically a condition. I'll call it C. And then depending on whether what you are doing, I will call this a S list. I'm trying to write a grammar. So what is S list? Now let me explain. So these are keywords. If is a keyword. Opening brace is a keyword. You can't change it. Closing brace is a keyword. This curly brace is a keyword or a terminal. This curly brace is a terminal. C is supposed to capture Boolean expressions. Expressions that evaluate to true or false. Supposed to capture Boolean expressions. Expressions which evaluate to true or false. If it doesn't, we'll see what happens. And what is S list? For us, S list means one or more statements of C. Any statement. I'm not saying which statement. Okay, so it could be an assignment statement. It could have been a if-then else statement. It could be a while statement. It could be a function call. Anything is fine. So the very, as you can see, the very brief description of this. In order to make it now, I will say, okay, here is my first grammar rule. S equals if, as I said, is a keyword, bracket. Instead of C, I'm going to write it as B to probably indicate it's a Boolean expression. Okay, I'll put this brace and I'll put S list. What is S list? S list is a single non-terminal. So it may not look like that. So this is my grammar rule. Now, if I write this grammar rule, since we are doing semantic analysis, let me try and illustrate you through an example. So let me put a source code which is closer to C. So suppose somebody writes if A plus B is greater than C, or maybe true, for all I know. Okay, then A equals, A is assigned B plus C. Maybe B is assigned B plus 1, and that's it. So this is my statement in the original C code which somebody has written in the source code, and along with you, we are trying to figure out what is to be done to translate this. So this is my source code. Okay, so you can start writing your own notes. And if you disagree with what I do, please point out to me so that we can look at a greater detail. Remember, all of this will happen with parsing. Okay, so I have to actually take you along with parsing. What does it mean? If I go slowly, the keyword if is seen by the parser on the stack. The keyword this is also seen. This is how the stack will grow. Okay, and then the stack will take this expression A plus B star C, maybe. Sorry, greater than C, and whether you should take an action now or later, we have to decide. This is how the parser stack is proceeding, and what we want to do is, before I lose something, before I miss out something, we would like to do semantic analysis and also generate. Right? So this is what I'm trying to explain in an intuitive manner. Okay. So remember this small piece of code. I will not clutter up this slide, and I'll try to put on a separate slide. What would I like to do? So I'll put it like this. My grammar is S. This is C-like. The one given in the notes is not so much like C, so it's slightly different. Should not matter. S list is a single non-terminal, and this is what my grammar is. So what we would like to say is, when you see this B, what is B? For my expression over there, I have written A plus B greater than C or true. All of this in C syntax. Okay, I have stripped off the parentheses before this and the parentheses after this. So this is the Boolean expression. Eventually, this will slowly get reduced to B, and then it will go past this part which is looking at the Boolean expression. But not happen all of a sudden. So let me go in real slow motion as the parser proceeds. Okay, so let's say the parser sees A, the parser sees B. So this is done, the parser sees B also, then it sees greater than. Now I am relying on your knowledge that plus has a higher priority than greater than, and the parser says I must reduce A plus B to an expression. So we'll do that. So what will it do? It will probably create a temporary T1 assigned A plus B. This I have to do when only I have seen up to A plus B. And I had looked at greater than and not processed it because it's a lower priority. This is the best case. This is not the immediate case. System has more problem if A and B are of mixed mode. Suppose A is integer and B is real. Then what will it do? Then it will say, okay, I can't do this. So it will say T2 equal to, I said is B, so it will say convert to. So int float to int. I'll call a special function which will convert it to int. Okay, this is T2. And then I'll issue out a different code which is T3 equal to, these are two parallel codes, they are not going together, which is T1 plus T2. What I'm trying to tell you is these are two different codes being generated depending on whether the types are compatible or not. If the types of A and B are not compatible, semantic analysis of the compiler will tell it that convert one of the operands to that of the other as per the rules of the language and then do the addition. So it is this code or this code, one of the two will be generated. Let me assume for simplicity they are all compatible. So I get away by generating the code T1 equals A plus B and ignore this for the moment. Now it sees greater than C. Now this fellow has to decide what do I do. So I've got T1 and I have to compare T1 with C. Now there is no direct operator which I can do like this. I cannot write, for example, T2 equals T1 greater than C, which is what I would love to do. Okay, if A plus B is in T1, can I write T2 equals T1, this is intermediate code, T1 greater than C. So I'll go back and show it to you that this is not allowed, this is not a valid code in the intermediate code list. Okay? And you can imagine why it is not valid. What are the valid intermediate code patterns? If you have gone through an architecture course, you have looked at machines and the machine instructions, you realize that there is no such machine instruction. Since there is no such machine instruction, we also do not keep it in the intermediate. So what do I do now? Intermediate code people said this is not what you should do. Since there is a comparison, we'll give you some operations which are very close to the comparison operations of a machine. So what they have given us is something like this. I can issue out code like this. If T1, which I'm going back to the first one, greater than C, go to I don't know where, followed by go to I don't know where. So observe what it has done. It's saying, okay, if this expression evaluates to true, then do something, or if this statement evaluates to true, do something. This is only one part of code translation. There is another way of generating code. You can see a lot of issues are coming up. If I could have also generated if T1 greater than C, okay. Okay, let me continue. I'll not confuse you. So let this go continue. So when I do this, what am I supposed to do? This expression may evaluate to true or to false. Let's assume that the compiler decides the result will be stored in a temporary T3. Now we realize go where? So if I want to go somewhere, I have to start labeling my statements. So now every statement is forced to be labeled. 10 is T1 assigned A plus B. 11 is this if T1 greater than C, which is for the small part. We have not looked at or, we have not seen greater than true also. This is done. Now it says, okay, if T1 is greater than C, the value of this expression is true. So then we want to say, okay, here in 13, can you insert this fact that this happens to be some T3 assigned 1. This means true. The expression is true. and this go to I will say is 13. So if the expression is true, please go to 13 and there assign the value T3, which is for the whole expression, to 1 or true. What if it is not? So in 14 I will issue out another go to, skip. Now I go to the next statement. Why I want to do this? Why I want to skip the next statement. What I want to do in 15, I assign T3 as false and I link this to this. So if it is T1 is not greater than C, set T3 to 0. And this go to goes to 16. Now you observe that when my control in the actual execution of the code reaches here, T3 has a value. It is 1 if this expression was true. It is false if the expression is 0. And this we have generated while parsing and not even seen the end of the story. So we're getting the idea. This is what we would like to do. So semantic analysis says, I take an expression. So this is semantic analysis for expressions. I'm deep inside it now. But I'm looking at control structure. Without doing semantic analysis of Boolean expressions, I cannot handle an if then else statement. So some point in time today, I have to go down and check how to evaluate Boolean expressions. But for the moment, we are assuming that if you see a B, a lot of code will get generated. So this code will have to be taken care of when B is processed, and B can be long. I have not even processed this one, not yet done. When I complete that, it will be an even bigger code out. So now we're getting the idea that if I have to do semantic analysis of this simple statement, which has two components, a Boolean non-terminal B to handle Boolean expressions, and a list of statements which could be anything in C, I need to do the following. So I will again go back and repeat this. This is what my rules are. Now we are saying along with parsing, suppose you are going fine. So this is a code, a piece of code, and we don't know how big, intermediate code that evaluates B. This obviously minus many details. Let's assume when the parser goes ahead and examines all of S list, it would have produced a huge bit of code, which probably is a code for what is generated out of S list. This code I mean is intermediate code. I'll give you a more concrete example in a short while. So I have intermediate code that evaluates B. I have intermediate code that evaluates the complete S list. But these are two separate things. Here is something for B, here is something for S list. We have to connect them together. The main issue is how to connect to make it an if then else statement. Connect to make it if then else. And the connections goes like this. If B is true, then I want to connect it to S list, which means I will put a label here, I'll explain later. Every place in this code where B evaluates to true, I will go and do S list. I have to do, because this is what the semantics says. If B is true, do S list. What do I do when B is false? When B is false, then I will go to the next statement which follows this if then else, but I don't know where the next statement is. This is all that we have to do. In other words, the semantic analysis of this statement will say that whenever B is true, evaluate S list, and whenever B is false, skip S list completely and go to the next statement of this particular statement. Let me try and generate code for a very simple thing so that you can get the idea in more detail. So I'm going to elaborate on this by writing some piece of code that we want to do, and you can see that it will happen along with parsing, and then we'll try and write some semantic rules. So let's say I still have if bracket B, and here is S list. This is the grammar. So I take a small construct. If A plus B is greater than C, okay, then do A equals B plus 5. These all not very important. Don't worry about what I'm writing out here. C equals C plus 1, and this is my piece of source code, which is a valid if then else statement in C. I'm going to process this along with parsing generate intermediate code. And let's see what it involves. For this simple thing, when a plus b is greater than c is getting evaluated, I'll assume I start with some number 20. These are all instruction numbers. I'll generate a sequential number starting from a given number, which the compiler will decide. Let's say I start with 20. First, I will do a plus b since it is greater than c. After seeing a plus b, I'll immediately generate this code. Some temporary is assigned. This is my notation, a plus b. I generate this. Once I have seen a plus b greater than c, I'm writing the points at which I'm generating code. So I've seen a little more, then I generate some more. At 21, I generate if t1 greater than c is equivalent to this, and I do go to, and I do 22 go to 2. This I emit directly. Go to where? I don't know. Go to where? I don't know. So what I'll do, I'll note down these statements that these are incomplete. So I'll put a small star here. The compiler knows that I've generated code, but I do not know where they should go. Incomplete. Great. Go ahead. No issues. Now with this, it goes on. And after this, it actually comes and goes there at this particular part where you do a equals b plus 5. So I start generating code for S list. I've already generated code for b. This is all the code for b, which is incomplete. This is the intermediate code for b, which I've generated after a plus b greater than c closing parenthesis have also been seen. Now as I go through the S list past, I'll generate a little below. In 23, I'll generate code for a equals b plus 5. So here is a temporary t2, which is assigned b plus 5, as you can see. And in 24, I'll generate a is assigned, I'm using this notation, t2. So I've generated code for a plus b plus 5. Okay. In 25, I'll generate the code c equals c plus 1, which is t3 equals c plus 1, the right hand side. And then I will do c equals to t3, which is the left hand side. This is what I meant. At this point, when the compiler has hit this part, I have two pieces of unconnected code, right, which is great, but it's not making an if then else statement. So what do I do now? At this point, the compiler knows, because it has gone past, that if T1, the destination of T1 is nothing but T3, where S list starts. So I can now fill up this with T3 and connect. Why? Because I have seen the whole statement now. I've seen the entire if then else. Now I'm processing it for if then else. So by doing this, I know that the then part connects to the complete S list and there is no issue. What happens to this go to? Now since I have generated code up to 27, 26, I know that 27 is the next address of whatever comes over there. I don't know what it is. I have not seen beyond this statement, but I will patch it up or say this is 27 and this becomes a semantically equivalent code and we are complete. And we are done. To the source. These are all intuitive, these is all I have done in a very hand-waving manner, but I have shown basically that there will be incomplete things, but when the two parts are ready, then the system says, okay, what is it? It's an if-then else statement. So I should tell him in this action part, which I have not written, which I'm going to write now, the action part will write in such a way that this fellow will be able to handle these connections. So the key things out here, the most important things are, how did we fill up this with 23 and this with 27, which made it an if then else. So this is what I'm going to now take, and now I'll go to my slide and at one of the rules on the slide where this is done, which is, so this is around, no, I think before going back I need something more. So I have to tell you about how did I manage this B. So it's important for me to handle the B. So let me go down and do that again. Okay, these are all given in details in the slide, but I'm doing it in slow motion so that you are with me as I go along. So how do we evaluate a Boolean expression? How do we handle or process? This is parsing and semantic analysis, a Boolean expression. I'm sure you know, but I'll repeat that. There are two normal ways it can be handled. For example, I can write a equals b plus C greater than maybe D, okay, or E. These all in C notation. What are the types? Obviously, B and C will be arithmetic type. Let's assume int. This is also int. Okay. So now if you add two int, you get an int. Compare with two ints, this will give you a Boolean value. Okay. Since I'm ORing with a E, I'll assume this is Boolean. So Boolean or Boolean yields a Boolean, and A is also Boolean. So this is a proper assignment to A. This is one way in which a Boolean expression can be handled, but the expression is this part, the right hand side. So Boolean expression may be assigned to not necessarily a Boolean variable, a floating point variable, anything you can do, some conversion will take. This is another way in which a Boolean expression is used. This is the first way. The second way is what I was trying to do now. If the same thing I can write, B plus C greater than D or E. And here is the use of another Boolean expression which participates in some other statement like this. Part of while, part of switch. So this is another way in which another context in which a Boolean expression is found. It is one context. Right hand side of an assignment, or it is as a condition of an if-then. So the language gives two different rules for evaluating depending on the context. So let me take the first one. To do the first one, I'll call it 1. The language says you are supposed to fully evaluate, I'll use this word later on also, will fully evaluate the RHS and produce a Boolean value, which you assign. In the second case, it says, this is my second, you can do partial evaluation and get away. Firstly, what is the difference for those who are hearing for the first time? You heard before, no issues. So the difference in this case is in the following way. So my expression, remember, is B plus C greater than D or E. And depending on the context, is it the RHS of an expression assignment, or is it a condition of a control flow construct? So if it is to be fully evaluated, this is what it means. Full evaluation says no shortcuts, no smartness, just completely evaluate the expression as you are supposed to do, which will mean something like this. So maybe T1 equals B plus C. I'm doing you generating code on the slide. If T1 greater than D, go to, I'll give numbers. This is 10, this is 11, this is 12. B plus C greater than D has been done. Now this has to be evaluated into a Boolean variable. So 11, I will go to 13, and in 13 I will generate T2 assigned 1, which means it is true. Then in 14, I'll make him jump this statement. And from 12, I'll come to 15, where I'll produce the false value. T2 is assigned 0. And here comes 16, which comes here. So with so much pain at this address 16, I have the value of T2, depending on whether the expression evaluates to true or false, it has the right value, 1 or 0. And then, since I'm doing full evaluation, I can write T2 equals T2 or E. I'm allowed to do this. If E is a variable, E is an expression, I'll produce it. So this is full evaluation. Why do we call a full evaluation? Because finally in T3, the value of B plus C greater than D or E is ready. If you want to assign it to A, I have to only say 17 A equals T3. I'm done. If you are using in a context, control flow structure context, then we don't do this. There, the first idea is there are two parts of the expression, two Boolean values. Is B plus C greater than D? Answer could be yes or no. And E, which may be true or false. Okay. And the idea is, since it's an OR operator, if this value turns out to be true, then I don't have to evaluate this. The expression is true anyway. Why do you waste time evaluating E? Because it's already true. Had this been B plus C greater than D and E, again this whole thing is Boolean. If this thing happens to be false, then don't evaluate this again, because this false, the whole expression is false, independent of the value of E. So this is the difference, essential difference between full and partial evaluation. In full evaluation, I don't care if it is true or false. I am going to evaluate the second part also, and the full expression value I obtain. Whereas in partial evaluation, which is used in control structures context, depending on the operator or and, we take a shortcut. If it doesn't require the other value, we will not evaluate. You have seen this code. Let me show you the code for this in the partial evaluation sense, and then I can make more sense to you. So when I partially evaluate a Boolean expression which is of this form, and I'm assuming that the operators and the operands are compatible, B, C are integer or float, you don't have to do any type conversion. So I'll go the usual way. So I will of course assign T1 assign B plus C, I have no choice out there. And of course I will do if T1 greater than D, go to somewhere, this could be 20, this could be 21, and this could be 22. Now comes the clue. Since it's a partial evaluation, I know this is OR. If T1 is greater than D, which means this expression is true, I am done. I don't want to do anything. Remember, both of these are incomplete. This is also incomplete. This is also incomplete because the destinations are not. However, you also know that if T1 is not greater than D, which means this expression is false, then I have to evaluate E. I can't do a short. So now the second part of the code goes like this. So I generate another piece of code which will be to evaluate E, okay, and see what its value is. So what will we do? So we will say 23. If E go to somewhere and 24 go to somewhere. There are 4 pieces of code which are incomplete because I have not connected them yet. So this is for B plus C greater than D, and this is for E. Now I have to connect with an OR. Since it is to be connected with an OR, now we know that if this statement is false, then I better go and do this. So I'll put go to 23 here. So he will go and evaluate the second. Now observe, if the control reaches if E go to something, at this point the entire expression is true. Right? So this point, the expression is true, the entire expression. If you hit here, if T1 is greater than 2, here also the expression is true. But here the expression is false. So I want to remember this. However, I have already resolved this. This I don't have to worry. There are 3 incomplete destinations. At 2 of these, the instruction turns out to be true, and one of them the instruction is false. So what do we do while semantic analysis? We create attributes. In my notes as well as in Aho Sethi-Ullmann's book, they will use attributes similar to what I am doing. So here is B, my non-terminal. So we carry with us true list of attributes. They call them B.TrueList. I think I have also called the same. So what are these? Let's understand. This is a list of addresses. List of addresses of this type. We call them quadruples. So list of quadruple addresses. 3 intermediate code addresses. This is also the same. So when I resolve this whole statement, we will say for this B, the whole expression has gone down to B. My B.TrueList is what? All those statements where the expression evaluates to true, which is 21, 23. I don't know where to go, but I know what, where I should fill it up when I know it. And similarly, B.FalseList happens to be 24. Do you get the idea? So not only I generate partial code, but I figure out what is incomplete, and when I have enough information, I will make this addresses complete. When enough information is known, we'll complete. Okay. So now if I go and draw back the picture which I drew some time back, which was incomplete, and slightly improve on this, I'll go back to my earlier slide. The semantics for doing this simple statement now turns out to be not this. Once you do B, now you have got two attributes out of it. B dot true list, which is a list of statements which are incomplete, and the expression evaluates to true, and we have B dot false list, which is also a list in this where the expression evaluates to false. Now you can see things are much better. Since it's an if then else, we will say B dot true list, all these which are incomplete should actually have the start address of S list, wherever this starts. So you must go and connect to this. So we use some notation, this is called backpatch. Backpatch says fill up. Fill up what? What you want to fill up? I want to fill up B dot true list. And what I want to fill up with? The starting address of S list. This is what I want to do. Wherever S list starts generating code, I want that. So this is the way of stating. This incomplete thing can be picked up when? After the whole thing is over. What happens to this whole statement? This false. What do I do with it? We will see now as I go out over there. So B dot true list is completed because I know where it should go. B dot false list, I still cannot say anything because that depends on what follows this state. So now I'll go and actually look at the code that I'm going to explain. Okay. It may look cryptic, but you should, if you're not following, feel free to ask questions. So let me go a little deep there, somewhere around, let's say 125. I'll come back to this for a moment. Let me go skip past. I'll go right to control structures. So look at this. I am on slide 134, where I have a small instruction. I'll explain this separately over here, but you have a look at it for a minute. The notation, if it becomes clear, this is what I'm going to use again and again. So please observe that while I write here, the statement there is S if B. Okay, I have not used C syntax, so I don't have curly brace. I have then. There is a strange non-terminal M sitting out here. This S has been subscripted with 1. I'll explain all of this. And then something is written out here, which I'll copy and then I'll explain. Backpatch B dot true list with M dot stat, and the next one says S dot next list is assigned a function call which is called merge. Again, I'll explain. This is B dot false list merged with S1 dot next. Each of these is important. What is not seen on the slide, I will write for you. M goes to epsilon. M dot stat is assigned the value next stat. You can see it on the next slide. Unless I done a mistake. But let's keep remaining here. Okay, so now I'll come back to think what I've written out here, and let's see whether you agree of what this cryptic notation means, because it takes care of semantic analysis of an if-then statement at a certain level of. First, observe this strange non-terminal M sitting out there, and now you should be able to appreciate this special rule and this semantic analysis. So coming back, what did we say? After I have generated code for B, I will go ahead and generate code for S, for S1. So these are the codes that we have generated. Now there will be incomplete things here. This is b.toList, which is incomplete. May or may not be. It could be empty also, but assume that this is not empty. And here is b.falseList. Other than these two lists, every other statement in B is complete. There is no issue with it. Now this, the first statement says, what should I put in place of b.toList? Those places where the goto is unknown. Now we are saying I know the goto. The goto is to be filled up with m.stat. So what is m.stat? An attribute of m. What is next stat? The next quadruple number. Okay. So now you can see why this worked out fine. I have to do a little bit along with the parsing. Okay. So when B is known, so let's say I have something like this. If A less than B, go to and go to. Maybe this is all that is there in my quadruple 11 and 12 as a result of B. Suppose this is all I have. If A less than B, some condition. So this is my true list and this is my false list. So the expression is true at 11 and false at 12. So if you wanted to evaluate, if you would like the semantic analyzer to figure out that 11 is incomplete and this is where the expression gets the value true, where the expression evaluates to false at the quadruple or address 12. This is what we note down, only the address. But when I move on, observe this m happens to come before S1. When you reduce epsilon to m, we say m.stat is next stat. What is next stat? Next stat at this point is 13, right? So before I haven't seen S, I have noted down that m.stat, which is a special attribute, has the value 13. Okay, this is done. And then after that, you will start assembling code for S1, depending on what it is. So a lot of code will come in. But I've already held on to this value, m.stat is 30. So what is it saying at this point? Backpatch b.toList, which happens to be 11, with m.stat, which is the first address from where the statement S1 gets assembled, which is 13. So please put 13 here and this is backpatch, right? So the first function basically connects the if to its then part. The code is here, we have not. What happens to the false part, which is 12? Well, I don't know where it should go. So now you observe, I'm going to summarize now, that there are attributes which have been defined with care and they are very, very purposeful. So I'll move away from this. So this code was written after a lot of analysis. What were our non-terminals? One was B, one was M, and the other was S. What are the attributes? The attributes were worked out by deciding the semantic analysis to be done, not the other way. So we said for Boolean expression, anything that remains incomplete is important to us. And because of partial evaluation, there will be many gotos which are not completed. Please hold them in these two attributes called b.toList. Again, remember, what does it mean? It means that if this is B, and if b.toList happens to be 14 and 17, it is very clear there is a goto which is not known in 14 and 17, but this is where the expression becomes true. If b.falseList is 22, then this is the goto which is incomplete, and this is where the expression is false. So while parsing, we are noting down, when you do m, I don't want to do anything, but I just want to define a new attribute called m.stat, and it just notes some addresses like this, because it is defined as next stat, but that is incidental. It has one attribute. The non-terminal m has exactly one attribute, B has two attributes for the moment, and S also has an attribute, which you might have seen the last time. It is called s.nextList. What does this mean? This is not an attribute which is incomplete. These, remember, are incomplete. So these are risks for us. I can't let them remain incomplete. The code will be broken. S.nextList is also a list of incomplete quadruples. Why do I need them? Okay. So if you assume that there is a statement like this, which let's say says while A is greater than B, do some statement S1, S2. I'm just writing briefly so that we are not worried. and something like this. So this reads as while A less than B, S1 followed by S2 followed by S3. Okay. And in this, one of these could have been, these S2 statements can be all different kinds. This S2 could have been, for example, a break statement, which you must have read in C. What does the break say? When you hit the statement, go outside the loop. So when I generate code for this while, which I haven't done, I will have a code for B, which is A greater than B. I'll have a code for its body, which is this S list. Right? And I have to connect it to make it a while loop. So whenever the expression is true, I'd like to go to the list and do things. At the end of the list, I would like to go back to evaluation of B and go do all that. But what is important is what happens if someone wants to jump out of this, which is possible. A break will do it, and there are many other statements which can force you to do that. So we would like to know if such a thing happens, then I don't know where this is going to. This will I'll know only when I know which is the next statement to while, which I don't know right now. I'm just seeing the while statement. So say the next of while is not known, I don't know the destination. So S dot next list, this particular attribute, basically notes down the target codes which are also incomplete because of a goto. Only gotos will make you incomplete. So a break causes a goto to be inserted, but the destination is not known. So I want to note it down. When I see the statement next to the while, maybe I see A equals B. At that point, I have seen the next statement, and the break I'll connect it to this A equals B. So observe that when I see a certain part of the source code, I want to take complete actions, do all the semantic checks, generate the appropriate code. Whatever I cannot generate because of forward jumps, I note it down in some attribute. Now I'll be going into these statements one after another. So we observe that for Boolean, incomplete things are possible. Create two lists, true list and false list. M is a dummy variable to figure out which number is important to me, which I might have missed when I skipped and went past. For example, when we did if B, then S. Then when the S started, I wanted to know where did it start assembling. So if I put an M over here, and in M dot epsilon, if I note down the statement where S is about to start, then my job is done. So whenever I need to know the first address, the last address, and things like that, we'll assume the full freedom to introduce the special non-terminals which are called marker non-term. So if you accept that these few things are required for any statement, I need its next list, which means where is the statement incomplete? Please tell me. Whenever I have a Boolean variable, I need its true and false parts, which are also incomplete targets within the body of P. So this is all that you assumed is known, and make some other simplifications. We can go through all the rules that I'm going to look at now. Once I finish one or two, maybe I'll take as an exercise, and we will do something which I have not given in the slide, and we'll go on. So let's go back to the slide. Now I'm looking at the next statement on slide 134. Look at it for a minute before I ask you to read more carefully. This is an if then else statement. There are really three fundamental pieces in this. One is the Boolean condition B, then a group of statements in the then part, which is labeled as S1, and a group of statements in the else part, which is labeled as S2. If you accept this, the rest is all a matter of connect. So let me draw the picture here. Okay, and then you will appreciate all these special marker terminals that I have put. This is what an if then else statement is. S1, S2 are only labels, these are just statements. So I have generated code for B, which means I have both the attributes B.TrueList and B.FalseList ready after the whole evaluation is over. If nothing is incomplete, they will be empty. Once I have evaluated all the code, intermediate code for S1, I have S1.nextList ready because the parsing is already done. Once I have finished S2, I have also S2.nextList ready. These are the addresses which are incomplete in S2. These are the addresses incomplete in S1, addresses incomplete in B. Now these three different components have to be combined to make it into an if then else statement. So it's very clear that this true list should basically start executing from S1. So I need to know what is the first address of the statements in S1. This is required. After S1 is over, you should not get into S2. These are if then else statements. So I am forced to issue out a go-to statement here which skips the S2 and goes beyond S2. So this will be an incomplete statement again. B.false list should go and connect with S2. If the expression is false, I do the else part. But then this, I need also the first statement of S2. And what does this go to? This goes to the statement outside, the next statement to this. So once you look at this, you observe now that what is completed by virtue of this, B.true list and B.false list will be fully completed. There will be nothing empty in B. Because I know the destination when the expression is true, which is S1. I know the destination when the expression is false, which is this particular S2. Okay, I know that this is going to skip. So these will get fixed. What will be incomplete? This is what we have to fix now. After this becomes an if then else statement by virtue of this connection, what is incomplete? Incomplete is this thing which I have introduced. This go to, because I don't know where it goes. I don't know what is after S2 right now. What is incomplete is also whatever is in S1.nextList. What I did not know, I still do not know. What is in S2.nextList, where do I go after S2, I still do not know. So the incomplete ones are basically a union of this go to, the new introduced go to, I don't know, plus whatever you had in next list, I still do not know, because I don't know the destination, plus union with S2.next. This is a theoretical exercise that you have to do. That connect B.true list with S1, B.false list with S2, put a go to after S1 to skip the S2 part, and all the incomplete ones hang out together. Now if you read what I have written on the slide, you will observe in a cryptic notation, that's all that has been. The line says back patch, which means fill up the list B.true list with M1.stack, and you can see the M1 before S1, the then part's first address has been noted in M1. Along the same lines, B.false list is backpatched with M2.stack, which is also perfect. Right? The else part has been connected with B. Now what is not so obvious here is what is that S1 followed by capital N doing? What is the non-terminal N? For that I'll ask you to go to the next page and see what it does. If you go to slide 135 towards the end you will observe N goes to epsilon. This is the last rule. Look at the semantic action. N dot make list next list is make list next stack. So you say the next quadruple, the next three address code that I am generating is incomplete. Make a list of it. Another function call. So whatever is the next stack, please make a note it is incomplete and emit a new goto with an incomplete. So emit an incomplete goto, note down this address and call it n.nextList because this statement address is not. So observe that n dot goes to epsilon is doing an interesting point of connecting part after then, which is this n, to after the if then else. So observe, after you reduce this if then else to a single statement S, what are the incomplete after reduction? Whatever was incomplete in S1 remains incomplete. Whatever was incomplete in S2 remains incomplete. And a new one which is added is n dot. So I'll pause here. This is the style in which we write semantic analysis for control structures. So I leave it to you as an exercise. Please read the slide. If you have already doubts, feel free to ask me. Otherwise, the remaining ones are very similar. I've given for a while. Do and I think something else also, but I'm not going to do it in the course now. But just to see whether you have sort of got a feel of this, I will do the partial evaluation shortly later. I will try, and with your help, this is not there in the slide, you should comment if anything goes wrong. We'll try and generate a semantic analysis for and in an intermediate code generation for loop. a typical for loop of a C statement. Okay, please note it is not in the slide and I wanted to do it on the fly in the lecture. Okay, so let me write, you know what how it looks like. So I'll just abstract out. So I have to write a grammar. So let me write a new rule for S. The previous rules remain. The new rule is we'll write a for because it's required. Okay, so we'll restart from here. So this is how a for statement looks like. So I will say for, I'll put an E over here to indicate an expression. So there's an expression out here, there's an expression, again an expression out here, an expression out here. We've got three things. Some of these may be missing. I'll ignore that special case. So this is what the for statement three parts are, followed by a brace, and it can be a list of one or more statements. So I'll call it S. This is the generic structure of a for loop in C. So now we have to decide how do I generate code for such a thing. So let me write a small actual code. Suppose I have I assigned 5. Okay, see, of course I will not have this colon. I assigned 5. Say I less than 100. Say I plus plus. Okay, and in the body maybe I have A equals 5. J equals J plus A. And that's it. I don't want to. This is the loop that has given to us. We have to do semantic analysis and produce intermediate code. Now what is the challenge out here? The challenge is that while parsing, now let me subscript these E's to say that different E's. I first see E1, the first expression, then I see E2, the second expression, and then I see E3. So while parsing, the real things which I will get one after another are, I will get E1, maybe I'll generate code for E1 and keep it over here. Then I'll get E2, I'll generate code and keep it over here. Then I'll get E3, I'll generate code and keep it as I'm getting this. Okay? I'm ignoring these semicolons, opening parentheses, for, because these are anyway terminals. And after that, I will for S list, or which is basically S. Now these pieces of code I should connect so that it becomes a for loop, which is very important. So when I'm processing during parsing, I don't care that E1 is a part of for loop. E1 is an expression, I generate code. E2 is an expression, hopefully correct, generate code. E3 correct, generate code, no connection between them. S list, list of statements generate. Suppose I did it for this small thing, since it is not too big, what will it mean? So when I get I equals 5, okay, so I may actually write I equals 5, or I can actually, if I could do very dumb, I can write P1 assigned 5, and then I can say I is assigned P1. This is my intermediate code. Let's say this is 11, this is 12. This is the code for E1 done. When I look at E2, I'm writing with a gap. If I is less than 100, go to somewhere, go to somewhere. This is my code for E2. Okay, this is what it says, so I done it. Then I get E3. My E3 code could be T. I've used only T1, so let me use T2. T2 is assigned I plus 1, and 16 I assigned in I the value of T2. So I've also generated the code for E3. These are the separate codes. Code for E1, code for E2, code for E3. Then I have to generate code for S list. You assume that the code for S list is here. Code disconnected code is not too difficult to write the code for this. A assigned 5, J equals J plus A, similarly to what I have. Now we know that if you want to make it into a for loop, the designers of C language have given a meaning to it. And the meaning happens to be like this. You must find out from the language if I am making a mistake. This is what I do first. So I'll first put this number. So I do E1 and evaluate E1, whatever it is. After evaluating E1, you want to make sure that before I enter the loop that the condition is satisfied. So after evaluating 1, I will evaluate 2. So I'll check whether the value of I is less than equal to the last value or not, which I don't really care now. After E1, I will actually evaluate E2. If E2 is true, then I will go and enter the body of S, which is 3. Okay. I enter and do the body. After the body is over, then I want to increment, so I do this, which is 4. This is the sequence, if you agree with me. So I first do initialization, then I do testing, then I enter the body. This is not in the order that I have got. I've already got E3, but I've not done anything with it. Then I go and do E3. Then I come and do E4. And after doing E4, I go back and check the condition. So I have to insert something here so that I go back to the condition. Okay. So this I am going to now write in a much more cleaner manner. So if I can do this properly, then this connected pieces becomes if there are for loop of C. So that's the challenge. I am first getting E1, then getting E2, then getting E3, then getting S. And after I have seen all of the right hand side, what do I connect with these in order to get a complete semantics of a for loop? So I'm only looking at now the semantic issues which are here. So let me write separately. Now you know what my grammar was. So here is my E1. This means some code. Here is my E2. Here is my E3. I'm going in the grammar order. This is how code is generated. And here is S list, which is. Now I have to keep my attributes also in place. So what are the attributes when I go for E? You know that this incrementation will have a true list and a for list because this fellow has a comparison. So E2 will have a true and a false list. Somewhere the expression is true and somewhere the expression is false, and this I have to propagate along with parsing through these attributes in semantic analysis. E3 and E1 are just evaluations and assignments, so really there is nothing incomplete over here. So there is nothing incomplete, so everything is fine. S list may have incomplete statements, so I will have S dot next list. So why do I ignore this S list to S? Because eventually one of my statements will be S goes to S list. Okay, so I'll eventually make it a single statement, so I'm not bothering. It's there on the slides. So if anything incomplete here is this. Now I have to observe that I have to make certain things. So since after E1, I automatically want to do E2, the comparison, I'm not going to put a go to in between. The code will flow through from E1 to E2, and that's what I want. However, when I get this true list and the false list, and I have also got S dot next list, at this point I should know the starting address of this. I should hold it somewhere. So now what I should do, to E2 dot true list. Okay, I'm not giving you the full solution, but a fairly part solution. This is to be backpatched with this thing, which you can call some m dot stat or whatever. This I can keep somewhere because I can put an m and I can note down this. So if I backpatch E dot true list with m dot stat, then whenever the expression is true after incrementation every time, it will automatically come here. No issues. After S list is computed, I want to go to E3 for the incrementation, but that is not here. It is against the sequence. So I have to introduce a new goto to make it a for loop. Fortunately, this E3 I can also note down by some other m. So maybe this coming first, is coming later. So maybe this is m2 dot stat. This will be m1 dot stat. So this one I will make it as m1 dot stat, which is starting of E3. And I can actually make this go directly there. So this I can resolve. This is not incomplete. Why? Because it is a local transfer and I have already seen E3. So I know what is the first instruction address of E3. So I resolve it immediately. This is okay. So now once I do this, I come here. But what do I do after E3? After the comparison is over, I want to go back and evaluate the condition. So I still have to use a goto. So this goto will go now where? To the evaluation of the Boolean condition, which is E2. So I have to note down this also. Let me call it m0 dot stat, some number is not important. And this should go to this m0 dot stat. So look at the spaghetti like code. This is the initialization. So I do first. After initialization, I do the comparison. Do I enter the loop or not enter? So I'm doing it without any goto straight away. After doing this, I'm also doing Is it correct? So after comparison, observe it is not directly flowing through. If it is true, it is jumping over here coming because this is an incomplete. So if the expression is true, I start doing S list. If the expression is false, I don't know what to do. Right? Because this should go out of the loop. So this is incomplete. This is incomplete, which I don't know. Even after the whole statement is over, unless I see the next statement to the for loop, I do not know where to go. So this will remain incomplete. This go to is fixed up. So come again. So true list is goes here. False list is goes out of the for loop. I don't know where right now. Once you go to S list, you can keep computing S list. If you have a break, you will go out, which I don't know, which is in S dot next list. But if you don't break, then you come out of the S list. We are forcing this flow to go back to M1 dot stat, which happens to be, basically I should make it correct. We should go back to the incrementation, which is this incrementation. So this is M1 dot stat. So after this, the body is over, he increments. After the incrementation, he goes back to testing and then to done. So if you want to do along with parsing, you observe that we have introduced quite a few goto. The one goto extra here, one goto extra here, and this whole statement is incomplete. I have to figure out what happens when this whole statement is over. So what is S dot next list of the for loop? So now you can see I don't know what is E2 dot false list. So this is incomplete. So I should note down. I'll use a merge for that. I don't know what is S dot next list. So I'll also union with this. And apart from these, every other target has been resolved. So what is incomplete here continues to be incomplete. This false list is where the expression should get out of the for loop. So I have to wait till I see the next statement and I continue. So to propagate further, that you can take any new construct that you haven't seen in my slides, all you have to do is to first write a grammar for that construct, which I did like this for the for loop, which I have not given. Figure out the essential aspects, which are 3 expressions and a statement, list of statements. Observe some of these could be missing. We'll worry about that later. If all the components are present, we said generate component for each of these in the order in which they come in parsing, which is E1, E2, E3, E4 or S. Work out the order for the semantics of the loop, which is given in the language. And now write your semantic actions, which are written informally here. These informal actions could be now attached to this grammar rule. And then you have got a syntax directed translation scheme. So I deliberately jumped to the end of my slide so you can see the control structures are far interesting. Okay. And in a slow motion, as parsing proceeds, we can actually generate code for any control structure. The key thing, if you go back, I'll go back to my slides now and just show you what is important over here if you read through. So if you go to slide 134, again, these may not be unique. See if you can write it differently. So observe that the essential constructs are if, be, then, S1, else, and S2. The rest are all are all introduced to create connections. Why do I need something before S1? You have to figure out why do I need to have this extra marker before S1? Because B dot true goes and does S1. Why do I need an M2 before S2? Because when B is false, I won't go to S2. Why do I need this N? If I don't introduce something here, the control will go from S1 to S2, which is wrong. So I block it by using extra non-terminal N, which forces a go to and make. So each of these non-terminals are essential, are necessitated by the rules of the semantics of if then else. Similarly, I take one more perhaps. I'll not explain. I'll just, so if I go to 135, okay, let's look at this while loop. Observe that while, this is not C. This is a generic while loop. C does not have a do. So our while loops syntax is, there's a while, followed by a Boolean condition, no braces. Then there's the keyword do, and followed by a list. So while B, do, S1 is the essential part of the construct. What we have introduced are M1 and M. And observe there is no capital N over here. So this semantic rule, if I summarize, without looking at the rule says, I need a placeholder before B. I need to know where B starts. So I need M1 before B. And I need to know before S. I don't need to know where S is. And why is that? You can see here. When the condition is true, I want to do S1. So therefore the M2.stat will give you basically the starting of S1. So B.true, I connect it to S1, which is through M2. After you have done S1, because of the while loop, I want to go back and evaluate B. So I need the first statement of B. So I need a B1.stat, M1.stat, and therefore you can see S1.nextList. What do I do after S1? Anything that is incomplete here, I must go and start doing M1. But what happens if there is nothing missing? This will be out of the loop. So I force a go to M1.stat to make the control unconditionally transferred to the start of it. And that is all that is required for a while do statement. So the crux of the matter is to realize that M1 must be introduced is an important point for this construct. Just before S1 is another important point, and nothing else is required. The rest is all. Okay, so if you have gone through the control structure part, I'll give you a few minutes to answer questions over here. You haven't answered anything so far, asked anything so far. So please feel free. First, the question that I would like to figure out from you is, are you comfortable with these notations? What are the cryptic about the notations? Certainly, I take a non-terminal ABC, put a dot, and then put some list, next list, false list, tag, something, right, with some meaning in our mind. So is that meaning of these things clear? Why should I have these special, this cryptic looking entities defined for certain non-terminals? What these functions are doing, introducing backpatch, sometimes an emit, somewhere else I would have said nextstat and so on. What are the purpose of these notations? If you have any trouble, please ask. See, there's a make list over here. So these are all built-in functions that I have assumed are available. In general, you can assume any function in C that you can write and put it over there to work with either flexyak or flexbison or fly of Python and so on. So these are all acceptable in the real tools. We have only abstracted them. So the critical parts, again I am repeating, are to get familiar with these well-known functions which have very clear meanings, getting a hang of where I should introduce these marker non-terminals, epsilon, what actions do I take, and what sort of intermediate code I generate so that my broken pieces suddenly start becoming like a control. So remember very well, when the parser has just finished up to S1, there are three broken pieces. B, a separate piece of code, two over here, B, a separate piece of code, and S, a separate piece of code. Only when these actions connect them, then it becomes. So with this explanation about how to write semantic actions and the cryptic notations which have been introduced, but they are very precise, they are concise. You don't have to write big essays. In 3 or 4 lines, we have expressed a lot of semantic actions which are done over here. So feel free to ask some questions before I switch over and do something else from the earlier part of the slides. So what I did earlier was to motivate what I was doing here. So I've done instead, I've given you what I really want for control structures. I've not done assignment statements. I can do a little bit over that. But first, a few questions about speed, the pace at which I am talking, whether the material is going smoothly or not. So I would like to have some quick feedback before I move on. If you have taken the quiz, you can even give me some feedback about the quiz. The assignment that I am preparing right now, and probably I'll release before next week, will have similar material that I have discussed in the classes. So if you are not following anything, you will find it very difficult to solve the assignment problems. Therefore, it is important that you ask your doubt. Okay, so since there are no questions, I'll assume that all of you are following very nicely. We have no questions. So let me touch upon the other parts which are important for me to wind up this module, of course, in the next week. So observe that once I assume that you have got a little more familiar with this notation, then the partial evaluation of Boolean expressions is given on slides. I'm going back to is given on slide numbers 126 onwards. Okay, so you can look at the simple. I'll take one or two only, and I'll also ask a question which I'll not answer. You should figure it out. So the first two rules are when you connect two Boolean expressions with an or an and, which are two very standard Boolean operators. Okay, not and ignoring. The more important for partial expressions are this relog. Okay, if you get a relog, which means a greater than b, a equal to b, a not equal to b, and so on, then what sort of code do I generate? Okay, and if you get just true and false directly as operators, then what sort of code I generate? So this code that is that the semantic analysis written assumes a certain style of writing the code. Okay, if I change the style, then the rules will also. But what is important to assume here is there is only one non-terminal b. You look at it most, and towards the end I've got a capital E, which is for arithmetic. So for B there are only two attributes, which are b.trueList, b.falseList, which I've already told you. If you are generating code for a Boolean expression, at some places the expression evaluates to true. I want to note them because I don't know where to go. The points in the code where the Boolean expression evaluates to false also we do not know, so I want to note that down. And when I create a larger expression with ors and dots, ors and ands, and maybe operands true and false, I want to continue building up the. So coming back over here, going forward, there are only two important. What is quadruple addressing in parsing? Okay, so let me ask the question. Good, I have at least got something to answer. Let me open my links. So this is the part which I think I had asked you to read, but anyway I'll explain. So somewhere in the slides, which I can tell you, I have used these words. Let me qualify for once. Quadruples, free address code. Okay. Some place where I was discussing GCC, I used Gimple. So these are all forms of intermediate code. Okay. The intermediate code basically has very few simple instructions. Okay, so this is there on some of the slides earlier. So those are called quadruples. So what are these basically? They are of the form. It depends on how you want to use it. I have been using it in the form an operator, okay, and two operands and a result. If it is binary, if it is a unary operator, okay, then I have a unary operator like plus, minus, and so on, one operand, and probably a result. The intermediate code form that I am using in the course basically doesn't use this form. It uses the result, which means something like A assigned B plus C. You cannot write another operand. This is over. Okay. Similarly, maybe B is assigned C plus D, or I can do P is assigned address of Q. So there are various forms like this which are allowed. These are the intermediate code that will generate. Now, if you remember your machine instructions or assembly instructions level of thing, we often in the code want to do something. In the assembly we write go to loop, where loop is some address over here. In the machine code we have this program counter, right? I'm sure you know this. So when the instruction is executing, the program counter points to the address of this instruction. Instructions are different length. If this instruction is a 4-byte instruction, after the instruction is executed, the PC moves by 4 bytes and points to the next instruction. So it's very important at the lower level that you must know the address of every instruction, which is basically a number. So when I talked about quadruple address, I'm always going to do this, whether I need it or not. Every quadruple will have a unique label, a number. This is my address. This number is the address of this 3-address code. You can call it quadruple over. So number is the address. Why do I need it? Because somewhere when I want to write a go to, I'll say go to 10. This is my label. Okay, so every intermediate code that we generate, however silly that may be, will be indexed with a number, which I am been referring here as the address. Really speaking, the address is a low level term. But these entities are numbers and addresses for me because I use them as targets for jump. Already saw in the kind of codes I was writing. Okay, so quadruple addressing is basically, it is not really used in parsing, it is only used in semantic analysis. So I'll again explain. So every intermediate code, even if it is not the destination of a jump, is indexed with a number, and this is very handy for jump statements. This is done always, and it is used for as targets for, and we don't have very kinds. Our jumps are very simple for jump statements in the intermediate code, and the intermediate code has only two of these. If something like a less than b, go to, so we call it if a rel of b, some relational operator with b, and I will have a go to incomplete, or I can have an unconditional transfer go to. We are the only transfers of control or jumps are a conditional jump and an unconditional jump. So when I talk about the addresses of a quadruple, I am talking about this number which are used to resolve the jump, and that is why I was using those m dot epsilon to basically find out the address of a jump depending on the control structure that I am trying to simulate. Okay, so I will take this part, this partial evaluation of Boolean expressions. I've given examples out there, but I'll take another example over here, and let's see whether we all agree to the generation of code that we will do along with parsing. So the Boolean expression is, let's say, in the context of maybe an if then else statement. So a plus b greater than c, and maybe flag, that flag is a Boolean variable, or d greater than 0. I've written some horrendously long expression. No, let me put something else. I'll cancel this out and I'll put a or false. So remember, like 1, 2, 3 are numeric constants for integers, literal A, B, C for the character world. Similarly, true and false are literals for the Boolean world. They denote some value depending on the language. You know, I'm sure the values in C or C++. So what I want to do, I want to generate code under partial evaluation. The grammar that I've given you will actually do that. Okay, so let's try and intuitively generate code as I go along. So I'm ignoring this if and bracket. I'll start with A. I'll look at A. The parser looks at A, says, okay, show me more. It sees plus, it knows it's an arithmetic expression. Looks at B, still part of arithmetic expression. Then it sees that the look ahead is greater and it says, okay, now I should generate code. So what will it do? It will do something like T1 is assigned A plus B. It generates this code. Okay. And after generating this, it will essentially become something like an expression. So it may become an E. Then it sees, so it is reduced to E, it sees greater than, and then it sees another C, which happens to be a C, which could be of the same kind. So now it knows that this expression is evaluated in T1. It should keep that information in mind. The attribute for E is T1, where the value of E has been stored. So for this, now we realizes I have already seen this, which is a relational operator. So we'll look at the rules for E, rel of E. We have said that if you see this, please issue out a code. My mistake, let me put a number, 10, so this is 11. So E is T1, so we'll say if T1 greater than C, like C is directly taken, go to, I don't know where, 12, go to, this are done together at the same time. So now this is the code for A plus B greater than C. It has already been done. After this, it sees there is a Boolean operator. So far he saw a relational operator. The operators are changing. Now when it sees a Boolean operator, he knows it's a Boolean expression. So he sees and flag. So what should he do? What sort of code will you generate here? Remember, this is partial evaluation. So the code pattern is different. He says anything which is here, so he is looking at the right hand operand of flag. So now he's already reduced it to a B. E greater than E has been reduced to B, and he's seeing about to see something like B and B after he replaces flag to B. So before doing that is okay. So here is my 13. I'm keeping a gap to show it's a disconnected piece. It's okay, since this also happens to be this. So if flag is true, then go to somewhere 14, go to somewhere else. So okay, this is what I can see. Partial evaluation. If A plus B greater than C is false, then I must go and evaluate what is the value of flag. Okay. Sorry, if it is false, I can quit because the expression is false. But if it is true, then I must see whether flag is true or not. If flag is also true, the expression is true. So I have to connect in that manner. So now we observe that if T greater than C, this is B dot true list. At this place, the small sub-expression evaluates to true. The connective is an AND. So now we have to make connection. Since this is true, I must evaluate the next part. So I will say 11 better go to 13, and you continue evaluating the other part of the sub-expression. However, if the expression is false, there is no point doing anything. So I will keep this in abeyance. I don't know where to go. What do I do when the expression is false? No idea. Okay, so it continues. When it comes over here, so now it has done this. When it comes over here, at this point in time, there is one place at which the expression is false. Here the expression is false. The connected statement, B and B is false at 12. B and B is false at 14. And B and B is true at 13. I have to note all of this down. That is the job of my partial evaluation grammar. So I've handled this. I've got an OR and I've got a false. So what do I do? How do I connect so that the whole expression evaluates to true, goes somewhere, and if the whole expression evaluates to false, it goes somewhere. So now observe the right hand side is false. The expression is already true at 13. So since the expression is true at 13 and it does not matter what the right operand is for an OR operator, if it is true, it is already true. From here I can go outside the statement to wherever the expression is true. So for this whole expression which I have not completed, this is the true list anyway. The expression is true at 12, independent of what you do over. However, if the expression happens to be false, which is at 12 or 14, then you need to evaluate with this. So what do I do over here? Okay, so what sort of code should I generate for B goes to false? I'm not telling you here, so that this full expression becomes a proper Boolean expression with true list and false. Write out at leisure. If you're able to figure out, great. Okay, it may be something different than mine. I have suggested something here, and I often ask, justify. For example, you see B dot true, B dot false in slide number 126, and subsequently when I give the semantic rules which follows on slide 129, if you go to slide 129, you'll see that I've written some semantic rules for B goes to false, which looks very out of the way. B dot false list equals make list, emit some go to, and so on, right? It's not very obvious why. And I've seen a false, whatever I'm doing and why I'm doing. So it'll be nice to know when the literal true or false is seen in a Boolean expression, which is to be evaluated under partial evaluation, what should be the actions, whether you can write some different action than what I have done and still generate correct code. Firstly, see whether this is correct. You agree with this? If you find that this is correct, see if you can make it shorter or different. This exercise you should always do to get a hang of doing the semantic analysis, reaching very close to my end. So let me tell you what I expect you to do before I wind up. So I have gone from the back side. My purpose was to actually take realistic piece of code, which are like control expressions, control structures, okay, and show how to generate code. So I've gone from the back side, and because you want to generate for control structures, you have to generate code for Boolean expressions. So I have actually gone back in no particular order. Semantic rules for Boolean expressions, control structures, which you should read. I think it should be pretty clear. So from 117 till the end, mostly the material I have covered in some particular way, trying to give you the feel of semantic analysis. Now, if this you have understood, it should be much easier to understand what follows before this. So between 50 to 110, what I have not covered today, which are, so this, sorry, Boolean experiments I have done. So now I have covered more. So what I have not done is array references. So up to 110 onwards. So I'll ask you to read array references. Now that you are familiar with the notation, you have to read the grammar given on pages 106 to be more particular. See whether you agree. This is a non-trivial translation from 106 to 110. Please read. And you should have doubts. I would love you to have doubts and ask. So translation for array references. This is not trivial. I will give you at least 2 or 3 assignment questions on this. Let's first read what is given. So it was slides, I think 106 to 109 or thereabouts. So please read it up. I'll touch it up anyway on the last day. I think I missed it out. I think all of this you will see I've given in great detail. It's from 99 to 109, about 10 pages. And if you go through them, you will find there are interesting issues. There is not only an issue of just merely translation, but you will find that there is some discrete maths coming in, there's a recurrence relation being solved and some interesting stuff which is done, efficient calculation, all hidden in there. Read it and keep your questions ready. Before that, I will just touch upon, I don't think there are any non-trivial issues, so read it and let me know if you have any doubts between. Sort of ignored, which is the translation of assignment statements. Intermediate code form which I have used in these slides, which are roughly similar to what Aho Setty-Ullman uses. You should read from slides, I'll just give you the numbers. That's all that we will use. So from 85, it is just a description of what kind of code you are allowed to write. So 85, 86, 87. So 85 to 87 is intermediate code. This is intermediate code format, 84 to 87. Read this also. This is what I have used throughout. There's nothing to explain. That is given as the language in which you have to, through which you have to generate code. Type checking for statements I'm skipping because I've already done synthesized attributes. I have also talked to you about structural and name equivalence, so I will not repeat that. This has been done. And anything else, if there is any other control structure that you want me to discuss, please you can ask me on that day. Remember that I will essentially do a 1 hour lecturing and the last 1 hour will be a tutorial. So I will pick up some problems you should solve. I will not lecture, but I'll try and help you solve those. So next week on Wednesday, on 20th when we meet, we will do a 1 hour lecture in which I will try and cover whatever is missing from my side, particularly array references, which I think is interesting. If I can, I will also touch upon procedure calls, which is not very difficult. I am not doing runtime environments in this course because I'm not sure whether whatever I have covered has also gone through well. So I'm doing purely semantics. Okay. But if you want any particular translation of, let's say, if you want to figure out how to translate a class or anything, you have specific doubts, how to translate a polymorphic function call, I can give you ideas about that, though I have not included it in my slide. So any semantic analysis, whether it is C++ or in C, whether you want to know how to translate a switch statement, anything you can ask in the last half an hour on next week. But before that, I'll give you a rundown of, in general, how semantic analysis. So please have more questions. I can see some other questions somewhere. How semantically implement associativity and precedence in C. Okay, so first I'll tell you there are many ways of doing this. This is to Raja Sen Bagam from GCT. So typically, precedence and associativity properties of languages are handled by the parser, because you can write grammars which take care of precedence and associativity completely for any given language, because the rules of the game are given. Every operator's precedence and associativity is given in a table. Okay? And if you read through my notes, which should be there in the QEEE page, I had given in my parsing module how to write unambiguous grammars for precedence, associativity, and arity, taking all three together. So in semantic analysis, this is not an issue. The semantic analysis, the more important issue is how do you match the types and all. So grammar takes care of precedence, associativity, but it cannot take care of meaning. So semantic analysis will try and do type checking, type conversion, type coercion, and so on. So really speaking, syntax takes care of precedence, associativity, and semantics takes care of correct code generation for that expression. Got a few questions at least towards the end, but I would love to have more during the lecture. I think we have crossed our time limit. So thank you and see you next time. you.